how do you want to approach this? We had talked about kind of comparing and contrasting the two kind of big ones right off the bat, and because there's been a lot of I think false association between the two.
So I want to compare and contrast the two cases because it's been done so much over the last few days. The New York gun case is pretty much cut and dry, right? You have the right to self-defense under the 14th. The right cannot be removed without due process. So that one is pretty simple. We're going to dig into it more, but on the face, that is that, because I've seen so much comparison, like I just said, of, so guns have more rights than women do, and things of this nature. The case of Dobbs is more complicated, right? But we'll start with the gun one. Like I said, on its face, it's pretty simple. New York State had tried to justify, and there are several other states that say this as well. New Jersey is very restrictive on that.
Very
so
much.
I'm excited
Maryland.
to see what comes of that. Is that you had to provide like a legitimate reason as to why you wanted to carry a firearm for self-defense, which was ruled under this court that the... What the fuck am I trying to say? Totally just lost my train of thought.
Well, let me add this on top of that.
Yes.
What happens is in these, what they call may issue states, where they may issue you a permit or may not.
May issue and shall issue.
And,
right.
Yeah, because most states are shall issue if they're not constitutional carry states already. But there's a few holdouts, the ones that are affected by the decision. I believe it's like 5 or 7. I don't remember totally offhand, but the major problem is that you had to prove, like you just said, you had to have some kind of reasonable. What was the phrase you just used? Like you had to have a reason. You had to have a reasonable means or a reason for wanting this gun. And most of the time, self-defense was not a proper cause. But the really screwed up part was the state was the one that determined whether or not you had proper cause. It wasn't whether you, the individual who has rights, felt like you had cause or not. It was arbitrarily up to the state itself. Right. And a lot of times even tighter within the cities, within those states. And so most of these places were labeled may issue, but in reality was will not issue.
Right.
A lot of those were.
And it was ruled under the, ruled this way under the 14th Amendment, what is called the Due Process Clause. That's why I was trying to think of this and completely lost my train of thought. So thank you for saving me. Was ruled under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. So I'll read that part here. Amendment number 14. Let's see. The validity of the public debt of the United States. Is that the correct...
I believe it's the first section in 14, too.
Yeah, okay, sorry about that. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdictions the equal protection of the laws. So what that says, in a little bit easy in layman's terms, right, is that your rights cannot be violated without due process. And because there is no due process in a potentially unelected official, if you're talking about a sheriff, then they're elected, if there's some, but anyway, a public official telling you whether or not you have the right to carry something. There are deeper issues that we'll get into later about allowing people to dictate what your rights are for you. But even under the framework of the Constitution and the amendments, the subsequent amendments therein, it is unconstitutional for them to decide and remove your right to self-defense, to conceal carry weapon, to carry a weapon outside of your home for self-defense without some form of due process. So that is what they're referring to. And that's where a lot of the confusion starts to come in. Maybe not even... Confusion doesn't even feel right to me because so much of it is intentional, right? Yeah. And it falls into a couple of different categories. Confusion, let me just finish that thought. The confusion between this and the ruling of Roe v. Wade, of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, because that was also ruled that way partially because of the 14th Amendment and the same due process clause, right? So I'm going to talk for a second about the different ways this is being confused, because we talked in your Let Me Ask You This about part of this, right? For a little bit, I was very angry because I know how simple it is for people to find out what the reality is of these two cases. I know how simple it is for you to look up, not you, but for anyone to look up exactly how these cases got ruled and why it is. And even if you don't agree with them, the logic, I believe, is sound. You know, I understand the reasoning there. You can disagree with it, but I think the reasoning makes sense from a logic basis. There's not a ton of jumps of, that's crazy. Why would you say something like that, right? So that part made me frustrated, and the other part made me very, very sad, especially for people that I care deeply about, that they, on two different levels, have been deceived. And on the first level, it is being told that this document and the amendments subsequent to it tell them what their rights are, right?
Oh, yes.
And they don't. And we've talked about that just tons of times on the show, right? And most people who are listening don't know. For anybody who's new here, anything like that, if you don't know, if you're here to learn, the Constitution doesn't give you your rights. The Constitution simply lays out a few of your rights and says exactly that the government cannot infringe upon them, that it has the duty to protect and defend them, right? That is what the Constitution and the Bill of Rights says. The Constitution lays out the responsibilities of the three different branches and a few other things after that. And then the Bill of Rights, like I said, is the 10 base rights that the government absolutely, definitely cannot infringe upon. So it doesn't give you your rights, nor do any of the people that are elected into it, or any of the people that we or you have decided that have any authority over you. And so
Not that you actually decided, but
so it made me sad to that effect, that I believe people have been intentionally misled that way through rhetoric when people on the news, public officials, pundits are talking about your constitutional rights, your constitutionally held rights, all these things, right? I think the rhetoric is very important, that we have to be so specific, because people now are under the general assumption that that is what's giving you your rights.
yeah, this piece of paper, the Constitution, gives me my rights.
And it sets people up for failure.
It does, because
know?
that is the opposite way that you should be thinking about the Constitution of the United States of America. It was not drafted to give anybody rights. It was drafted solely so that the federal government at which the founders were establishing, they were setting the boundaries of the absolute rights that they cannot infringe upon.
Right.
And that it is not a list of your rights. It's a list of rights that cannot be infringed by the federal government. It is more for them than it is for us. Our rights are innumerable.
It said, and that's the Ninth Amendment, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. What that says, right? This is not a full list of your rights. This is a small number of rights that we are laying out that are specifically protected from the government. That the government we are laying out cannot and does not have the power to infringe on these rights. That is specifically what we're saying. And that's why creating an amendment is such a difficult thing, and that's why it's such a large obstacle to get over, and why it's such a big deal, right? It's because it is laying out constitutionally another limitation of the government that may not have been expressly lined out when the founders wrote these documents and whether people made the amendments.
Yeah.
What is up, Zeke? We're happy to have you here.
What up, big
So,
dog?
It concerns me that so many people are of that mindset because, like I said, I think it sets them up for failure. If those are the building blocks that you're going off of, that you're limiting yourself to what this piece of paper, what the document says, is you're setting yourself up for failure. That's the best way that I can put that. And the second layer to that is all of these people that are under the same uninformed, I don't know. I can't think of the exactly the correct terms. Uninformed assumption, or they're convinced that the 9 people on this council, on the Supreme Court, are dictating to them what their rights are. that they have some form of authority over telling you what your rights are. Right?
Yeah.
And it was confusing to me, and also keep me a little bit open. I'm seeing people, especially under the road things, say. Saw a lot of shit like on Instagram of like, I will aid and abet abortion. As you should. As you should. I promote this because I don't think that if you believe that this is one of your rights, that abortion is one of your rights, then you should pursue that path, right? I believe that you are the one that defines your rights. So if you yourself, people that we really care about, that are posting shit like this, that say things like this, believe things like this, right? You're limiting yourself by allowing and providing, giving the authority to other people to dictate to you what your rights are, when truly the only authority to that lies within yourself.
Yes.
And it's like sad that, truly sad that people are not accepting of that. You know, that they're limiting themselves within that by providing that authority to other people.
And they've been spoon-fed this
Right.
this false narrative throughout our entire life. Generations of people have been spoon-fed this bullshit about how the system is supposed to work, and there hasn't been a period in time at which that lie has been more substantial than in today's world between the Gen Zers, the Millennials, and the Gen Xers. Much less, we don't really count the boomers at this point, but because they obviously have no idea what their rights are and they don't care about them, or if they recognize them, they've proven that all they want to do is strip them away at every possible convenience.
100%.
But the real, let's put it this way, one of the, I'll add another layer of problematic thinking that goes with this forced narrative, thinking that you should think that the Constitution gives you your rights versus vice versa, and that the Supreme Court can dictate your rights when they make an opinion and things like this. And so
Right.
when it comes to something like abortion, the place where that belongs is within your state and within your state constitution and your state laws. That's where all of this is supposed to be. But the brainwashing of the American citizenry for generations have been trained now to forget about the foundational aspect of small r republicanism, belief in a republic, that you know best for what you and your fellow statesmen want, to thinking that everything that you think should be forced upon the citizens of other states. So everything has to be done at a federal level because this is our democracy. And if you want something to be protected in your state, you have to automatically want that protection for the other people in other states, which by itself is not necessarily inherently wrong. And there are organizations that move within the states because this is America, and you do have the power to, say, strike up a 501c3 nonprofit that promotes say, we'll just use abortion in this case because that's what we're talking about. Abortion being open and available and safe and all this stuff. And then you have offices, or you push for legislation in all sorts of different states and all that. You're trying to convince the populace of places to get on your side. That's the way that is supposed to work. You're not supposed to say, well, those dumbass people in Missouri are a bunch of backward-ass thinking motherfuckers, so we're going to force it on them at the federal level. That's the sign that wherever you're at on your stance on where your rights come from, you know that they were built in a backwards manner, because you cannot force another individual to infringe on someone else's rights. And if those rights are innumerable and it is not explicitly called out in either the federal or state constitution, you have to do the groundwork to change it from the bottom up. You cannot change it from the top down. That is how democracies work, and that's also how dictatorships work. And if you are raised, generations of people now are raised to believe that we live in a democracy and it's supposed to work like that, you're not concerned with your state politicians unless they're directly pushing for something you support. You're more concerned with the federal government and the consequences of those laws passed, because they affect us all as Americans, and we should all be one big, happy, United States of America. So we're one big country. We should have all the same protections that I think that we should have right here for me. And that is a fundamental misunderstanding of how the whole system is supposed to work.
Welcome to the salt of the streets, coming at you every week with this food for thought. Hope you ready to eat everything.